I just want to start by telling you how very grateful I am that you folks invited me to come here and do the thing that I enjoy doing more than anything else in my life, and that is talking about my experience with Alzheimer's disease. I'd like to introduce my caregiver now of almost 40 years, Amy. She's behind the camera there, and she's struggling to get it started. I want to just mention one thing. My childhood I spent in Central Florida, and even though I met my wife Amy when I was living in Hawaii, and then we migrated to Eastern Washington where we've lived since 1986. But also I was born in Savannah, so I have a little bit of a connection with you folks. I'm not entirely a stranger here. Since 2013, I've had 5 MRIs of my brain. Okay. When neurologists and radiologists look at the MRI of a brain and they're interested in neurodegenerative diseases, they look at 2 primary things. One is the volume of the hippocampus. Okay. The hippocampus is the part of your brain that translates short-term memories into long-term memories, so it's about learning. The other thing it does is it keeps you oriented in time and space, so you know that today's Friday, you know you're in Miramar Beach, Sandestin. You've been around the hotel here now a little bit, and so encoded in your hippocampus is a map, a floor plan of the building already. So you know your way around, you don't get lost, you don't go wandering, that sort of thing. The other thing that they like to look at is the ventricles, especially the lateral ventricles. The ventricles are void spaces in your brain that expand as the brain atrophies. So it compensates for loss of tissue in the brain, and it becomes a kind of a proxy for how much atrophy your brain has experienced. Now, when I was the first MRI I had for disease was in 2015, and they said that my hippocampus volume was less than the 35th percentile for men my age, but that my lateral ventricles were greater than the 99th percentile for men my age. So in a room of 100 men, I would have somewhere in the one-third level of hippocampus volume. I would have the most atrophy, overall atrophy of my brain. Okay. Then a couple years later, 2017, 2018, I had a couple more MRIs. And this time they said my hippocampus volume was less than the 1st percentile for men my age, and the volume of my ventricles was greater than the 99th percentile. So in a room of 100 men, I would have experienced the most brain atrophy of anybody in the whole room. Now, I looked on the internet for other people who had those same kind of numbers, and they're in memory care. So people in memory care you'll see those kind of numbers. Now, my neurologist cautions me there's not a real direct correlation between atrophy and cognitive decline, but it's still a major factor. And so, like I said, that's what you'll see in memory care. My experience began in 2013, actually, or 2012, when I began feeling a little unsteady, a little dizzy sometimes, almost intoxicated, and I didn't know what that was about. My grandfather had had a tumor, a brain tumor, and I thought, well, maybe I got the same thing. So I went to see a neurologist, and he checked me out and says, no, there's no brain. They sent me for an MRI, no brain tumor. And then, well, if you're having trouble with balance, maybe there's something wrong with your vestibular system. So I went and had some kind of special testing where they did fancy equipment and they tested my vestibular system, worked fine. So what we didn't recognize at the time is if you're dizzy and balance issues and there's nothing wrong with your vestibular system, there's something wrong with your brain. That was going to emerge over the next couple of years because we get to 2015, or 2014, end of 2014, we're in Hawaii because my son's getting married, and there's a lot of stuff we had to do to get ready for the wedding. So I go to Walmart to pick up a bunch of things, and I get through the checkout, and I'm starting to leave the building, And there's some woman running after me shouting, hey, 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 wait. And she's got in her hand my credit card and a stack of cash that I had left on the counter. And I said, whoa. So I took that and we went home. The wedding came off really well. And we go back to Washington, where I was working as an engineer. And one of my jobs was to review a lot of paperwork for computer software. And I start to find out that there are other people that are working with me, other teammates, and they're finding issues that I'm missing. And I'm trying to wonder why I'm not catching up with all this stuff. And so I start to get really nervous, and I go back to the neurologist. And so he gives me this little test, you probably heard of it, called the mini mental status exam, where they takes only about 10 minutes or so to give you. And one of the things that he did in the test was he had 3 simple everyday words, okay? So he drilled me on those words. And I've looked up how this test is supposed to work. He drilled me a lot harder than what they would normally do if you're just following the protocol. And you just over and over and repeat these words, repeat these words, repeat these words. And I thought he was being silly, okay? Then he has me do some other things like some mental math. You subtract 7 from 100, subtract 7 from that, subtract 7 from that. And then he turns around and asks me, okay, now what are those 3 words? Well, I could remember one of them, but I was really kind of shocked that I just could not pull back those 3 words. And so I asked him what they were, and he told me later after we're done with the quiz. And when I was driving away, I said, now what were those words again? Then I couldn't remember any of them. But when we were done with the test, he told me about, he gave me this real sad look, and he told me about something called mild cognitive impairment, MCI. And he said, you got something called MCI. And he didn't spend a lot of time with me on that. I think he was kind of feeling kind of awkward. And later I went to go look it up. And what I found out is that MCI is a umbrella term, kind of a syndrome, a set of symptoms. What he wrote in my medical record was early stage senile dementia, likely of the Alzheimer's type. Okay, so that was what I walked away from with my initial diagnosis. We talked to a friend of ours who's a nurse, and I said we need something a little more high-powered. So she directed us to the memory, brain, at Harborview Hospital in Seattle, as part of the University of Washington, at their brain wellness clinic there. So we got an appointment there, went there. Instead of the 10-minute quiz, they subjected me to 3 hours of intense mental testing, cognitive tests. And they also gave me the next MRI that I got, and then they had us come back a couple weeks later, and I got the same sad look. You know, we're sorry to tell you this, but you definitely have mild cognitive impairment, and it's likely, they told me this verbally, they didn't write it in the record, but it's likely Alzheimer's disease because of what we see in the MRI with the way that's going with your brain. So we, of course, were kind of blown away. Now, one of the things that they did give me was a piece of paper with a to-do list on it of things to do that you can help yourself with. Those included things like aerobic exercise, Mediterranean diet. They told me, don't quit your job. And it turns out the reason for that is because it's important to stay connected to other human beings. Okay, so quitting your job would put you in the workplace where you're working around other people, and that's a benefit. Sleep, they said, is really important. If you got sleep apnea, if you need to have a CPAP machine, that kind of stuff. Getting good night's sleep is really, really important. So I took those things, and I didn't immediately jump on all of them. I didn't immediately jump on any of them, other than I was also finding out that I couldn't drive a car safely. And what would happen would be I'd come to an intersection, got to make a left turn. And I'd make the turn, and there'd be, all of a sudden I'd realize there's a pedestrian in the crosswalk, and I'd slam on the brakes. And that happened about 3 times in 2 weeks. And after that, I said, you know what? I should not be driving. So I quit driving, and Amy drove me everywhere I had to go. And then we also were invited to join a research project at the University of Washington called HABIT. It's from Mayo Clinic. And we spent 2 weeks there on that, and I won't go through the whole program, but one of the things was education. And they told us, they emphasized the importance of physical exercise. Now, when I quit driving, I still had to get to work. And fortunately, my office was just about a mile, very pleasant walk from home. So I started walking that distance. And I kind of, as things went on, I kind of felt good about getting that exercise, because I was not someone who got a lot of exercise before. I didn't. Okay. So I started doing that. And then one afternoon, I'm walking home from work, and I come to this intersection. It's a pretty busy street. You got to get across the street, and it's right near the high school. And so if I'm coming home from work, that happens to coincide with the time when the kids are getting out of school, and the seniors are all driving, and you're taking your life in your hands when you cross the street there. I'm sorry, that's the way it is. Okay, so I remember I'm standing at the intersection, and I'm watching the lights turn different colors, and I see the cars, some of them stop, some of them go, some stop, some go, and I cannot make heads or tails out of what's going on. And I know that it's not safe for me to cross the street unless I do know what's going on, and I'm just standing there baffled, totally baffled. I see this one car come up the road, turn right at the intersection, go down toward the river, and suddenly I realize the cars go on the right-hand side of the road. As soon as I remembered that, and all of a sudden, everything made sense. And then I could figure out, okay, when the light turns, when that little white man in the light turns white, then I can cross the street. That's all good. So, but that was another real kind of thing that shook me up. We had a series of appointments in Seattle to go to. And so we would drive there, Amy would drive, and before we leave town, it's a couple 100-mile trip for us to get to Seattle, and so we'd want to stop and get gas. So we stop at the gas station, and I get out, fill gas, I put my credit card in the machine, and the machine wants to know my zip code. Now, we've had that zip code for 30 years, but I cannot remember the zip code. So I go ask Amy, what's our zip code? And she tells me what it is. And it's not like, oh yeah, that's right. No, it sounded like it's a number I'd never heard before. It was just brand new. A couple weeks later, I'm calling somebody, I get an answer machine, I want to leave a voicemail message. Please leave a detailed message, your phone number, and we'll call you back. So what's our phone number that we've had for 30 years? So I ask Amy, what's our phone number? And she tells me. And again, it does not sound familiar. It worked. That's the phone number I left, and they called me back. The zip code worked in the machine, but again, it's just not familiar to me because those things, I was losing that stuff. Now, I started to do a lot of research on MCI on the internet. I just plug in MCI because I was clueless about all of the rest of the whole thing about Alzheimer's disease and all that kind of stuff. There's something that just kept popping up was physical exercise being a very valuable tool in fighting the disease. And I read a number of things about that. One of the things that I read was that the reason that it's so helpful is because when you're doing aerobic exercise, and this is for more than 20 minutes or so at a shot, you're going to get some better circulation of blood in your brain. That's true. But what's most important is your body is going to generate a special protein, and it's called the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And what this protein does is it actually repairs damaged brain cells, and it prompts stem cells in the hippocampus to form new neurons. So that turns out to be really valuable. And we enrolled in this thing in Seattle where they taught us all this stuff. And right after that, this was December 2015, right after that I came home, and we'd had the initial diagnosis in June. We went to this program in end of November, beginning of December. As soon as I got back from that, I went and joined the gym and started getting on the treadmill. And every single day, it was helping to walk back and forth to work, but getting on that treadmill every day we work up a sweat and get the juices flowing. After that, I gradually began to feel better and began to feel more sharp. I made an initial attempt to get back to driving and decided that was not a good idea. But after another couple months of just getting that exercise every day, all of a sudden, I could drive fine. I drive fine to this day. I don't have any trouble at all. I don't have near misses like I was having before. I'm doing just fine with that. Can you get the next slide, please? Okay, I should have done this at the beginning. I want to give you some disclosures here that are very important here. First off, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher. I have no medical training, and I'm not claiming to be cured. What I am claiming is what they told me. I'll just tell you what they told me, and that is that I've probably bought 10 years. Okay, so, and 6 of those years are gone already, but I bought 10 years. But what I do want to do here is discuss my personal experiences and discuss the research that explains what my experience has been. What I've done is, I'm not telling you anything here except for a couple things that are not in my book. And the book has been reviewed by a neurologist, a neuropsychologist as my co-author, an internist, and some other folks. And I cite all the research that it's based on. So so if you want as the basis for what I'm talking about, it's in the book. So. Let's hold it right here for a second. I just want to, I'm sorry. So that was how I got started on this. And since then, what I've discovered is that if you're on the treadmill and you're going to be on there for 45 or 50 minutes a day, and you got a tablet, you can watch a whole lot of YouTube videos, a lot of them. And there is a lot of interesting stuff out there, especially when it comes to this dementia business. Okay, there's all kinds of stuff out there. Go ahead now and give me a slide. Next slide, please. There. Oh, okay. All right. So just a couple thoughts on, I had retired in 2005 from the federal government after 35 years. I was still doing engineering consulting work. I was also substitute teaching physics and biology in the high school. I love photography, and so I was doing that. I mean, life was great. All across the board, our kids were doing fine. They'd all moved out, but game changer. All of a sudden, life had changed. Life had changed. So I've already talked about this. And next slide. Next slide. So next slide, yeah. Okay, right here. Okay, so a question that I hear all the time when I start talking about this is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Okay, and I can recommend another book that you might be interested in. It's called A Son's Journey by some guy named Kurt. He's got a good chapter on this. It tells you the same kind of stuff I talk about in the book. But you understand, like mild cognitive impairment, Alzheimer's disease is an umbrella term. It's a syndrome that could have a number of causes. Alzheimer's disease is the most common one. 60 to 80% of the dementia cases are Alzheimer's disease. However, my father had dementia. He did not have Alzheimer's disease. It was probably caused by hydrocephalus, which he had, and that he had a very difficult time. He also had a lot of strokes, and so another form of dementia, another cause of dementia, is the don't have it on there. the vascular dementia caused by those kinds of things. So there are a number of causes. I would point out that there are no supplements out there that have been shown, that have been clinically, legitimately shown to reverse, to stop, or even slow the advance of Alzheimer's disease. Now, I'm talking about Alzheimer's disease specifically. For example, there may be a vitamin deficiency that's responsible. Vitamin B12 deficiency can cause dementia. So it's, and if you start taking vitamin B12, if you've had some deficiency there, like vegans, like one of our sons, that can be reversed by supplements, if it's not advanced too far. Okay, but when you're talking Alzheimer's disease, the supplement right now, there's some interesting research going on there that might flush up a couple of them, but right now there's none clearly recognized scientifically as being valuable. Next slide, please. Okay, now the other question I get asked a lot is about, what about, I can't remember this person's name, and I've known them for a long time, and then I just can't remember the name. Or there's a word that I use every day, and I can't remember what that word is. I just get stymied. So it turns out that is pretty common. As you get older, every brain atrophies. Every brain starts to experience some kind of issue with memory. It's just that in Alzheimer's disease, it's suddenly on steroids because the atrophy of the brain suddenly accelerates and takes you to the end. Okay, so the rule of thumb on this, and it's just a rule of thumb because it could be indication of Alzheimer's or dementia. But the rule of thumb is that if you can't remember a word or somebody's name and it comes back to you later, then it's probably just normal aging. Everybody's going to experience that. Or you go into a room to get something, and then you get to the room, you can't, well, what did I come here for? Well, I don't remember. And you go back out, and then you remember, and you come back. Okay, so once you get past 55 or so, or even 50, that's going to happen to you no matter what. Okay, but if the name doesn't come back, and in the case of my phone number or my zip code, and it doesn't sound familiar, that's a different story altogether there. So, next slide, please. All right, now, historically, the word Alzheimer's disease has been equated with dementia. So if you talk about somebody with Alzheimer's disease, you're talking about somebody with dementia. That got to be kind of confusing when we came to realize that Alzheimer's disease can begin as much as 20 years before dementia, before 15 years perhaps before the first symptom. It's been going on, kind of building up, and all of a sudden something changes, there's a switch, and it flips over, and all of a sudden you're having memory loss. But it's been going on all that time before. So it's not dementia yet, but it is Alzheimer's disease. So in 2011, they got together and came up with a new system for trying to understand the disease and talk the same language. Not everybody's on board yet. My early neurologist was using kind of old-fashioned terminology about senile dementia. But they have some new terms now. Next slide, please. So here, you're not going to be able to see this very clearly, but there are let me say right here, there are three fundamental stages of Alzheimer's disease. The first is what we call the preclinical or prodromal stage. Okay, there are no symptoms yet. Probably nobody has a clue that something's going on. It's going on silently with nothing else. But that's the first thing. And nominally, you might say 15 years for that. Okay. The next stage, the middle stage, is what we call the mild cognitive impairment, the MCI stage. Okay, that's where you're having issues, you know you're having issues, you know something's not right, but you're still able to function normally. You can live alone if you have to. Okay, so you can get through your day without needing any help from anyone. Okay, that nominally is a 5-year period. And then after that 5 years, you move into actual dementia. So dementia in Alzheimer's disease is the last third in this system. But we should understand, and we call that the middle stage. If it's Alzheimer's disease, we're talking about, there's lots of causes of dementia, there's lots of causes of MCI. Okay, but the most common in both cases is going to be Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so we call that MCI due to Alzheimer's disease, and we call that Alzheimer's dementia, that third stage. That's dementia. Now, what's the boundary between MCI and dementia? Okay, and that boundary is the ability to care for yourself, the ability, say, to live alone, for example. If you get to the point where there's some part of your daily life that you cannot do alone anymore, okay, that's when they consider that you've moved into actual dementia. Okay, now, they also break down Alzheimer's dementia into 3 more parts. So some people just say this is really 5 steps. So could we move to the next slide, please? Okay, so the first stage is called the mild stage, and it's not really much more serious than MCI. It's sort of a more advanced MCI. It's just that you can't live alone anymore. You can't do all your stuff yourself. The next stage, though, is the moderate stage. That's when things are starting to get more serious, and you start losing touch with people. You have personality and behavior changes. You know, people get kind of crabby or suspicious, very suspicious often, not always, but often. But you can still get around. You're having difficulty, though, with daily tasks. This business about caring for yourself is getting more serious, and you're starting to lose touch. The third stage is called the severe stage. And in the severe stage, you're generally bedridden. And one of the things that's going on, too, is as it continues, is the ability to swallow becomes impaired. And so people in this stage might instead of swallowing, breathe their food into their lungs, which causes aspirational pneumonia. And very often that's what the people actually die from. It's Alzheimer's disease, but the death certificate may say pneumonia or something like that, which complicates our ability to keep track of the statistics on this stuff. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's a picture of Alzheimer's brain. It's not a picture, it's somebody's rendition. And you can see on there the hippocampus, where the hippocampus is located, and where the ventricles are. And you can see over here how the ventricle they're shown is expanded. Those ventricles both have expanded due to the loss of brain tissue throughout the brain. Next slide, please. Now, in 1901, there was a pathologist in Germany by the name of Alois Alzheimer, which you might recognize, might suggest where the name of the disease came from. And he was examining the brain of a woman who had died from Alzheimer, who was known to have had dementia, and she died. And so they were doing a biopsy of her brain. And looking in there, there's a couple things that he noticed for the first time. And that was, he saw these plaques. You see, they're the yellow things there. It's some kind of plaques that were building up on the neurons that appeared to be related to what was going on with her mentally before she died. Next slide, please. The other thing he noticed was little tangles of stuff in the brain, little tangles. And so what those tangles were, it turns out to be microtubules. And if you studied modern biology, not the biology baby boomers got many years ago, but the biology we have today that I taught for a while, you'll know microtubules form a kind of skeleton within the cell. It gives it its shape. And they're also part of the process by which nutrients are transported around inside the cell, kind of like a conveyor belt kind of arrangement. And they're held together by a certain protein called tau. If you have a defective tau protein there's something wrong with it, what will happen is these microtubules will suddenly collapse into a tangle. And that kills the cell. You can't get the nutrients around within the cell dies. And so the the two hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease that make it unique from the other dementias is the presence of these plaques, these amyloid plaques they call them, and the tangles that they find in the brain. So that's when that, and this is usually observed in the autopsy. Oh boy, I'm down to last minute. Okay, 5 more minutes, okay. Okay. All right, next slide, please. Okay, now these are the 4 ways that, most likely ways that Alzheimer's will manifest itself. Okay, will manifest itself. And that is, and they don't always show up in the same order in everyone. Okay, the one that we are most familiar with is the memory syndrome. Somebody's having trouble remembering stuff. Okay, and so that'll be on the top of the list, but it may not be the first one. Probably my first one was the second one. It's called the visual syndrome, and that is impairment of visual processing. So when I would come to an intersection, I turned this off. Can you hear? Yeah. When I would come to an intersection driving the car, I would look into the crosswalk. But in the back of your brain, in the occipital lobe of your brain where the optic nerve plugs in, what that's supposed to do, it's supposed to draw a picture of a person in the crosswalk. But if it doesn't draw that picture, you're not going to know that person's there. Okay, so they call that Benson syndrome. And in my case, that was probably the first symptom of these 4 here. The next one is called the language syndrome, or the logopenic variant. That's when you have trouble with word finding. And when I watch these videos after I'm done, and I'll go through there, and I will see things that I said I didn't use the right word, and I'll have to go back and do some kind of editing to clarify what I was saying there, and maybe you will notice this. I won't notice it while I'm talking here. You may hear it. I may see it when I look at the video. But what's happening is you can't remember the word that you're supposed to use, and so you plug another word in its place. Very often, the first letter of the new word will actually be the same letter as the word you meant to use. Now, something you will probably recognize from this syndrome is that when it advances, it gets to what we call word salad. I think you're in your line of work, you probably are familiar with word salad. You've probably likely met someone speaking word salad, and they are just talking total gibberish. But as far as they're concerned, they're carrying on an intelligent conversation with you. In their mind, it's all normal. And so we call that. The other one is the frontal executive syndrome. This generally tends to come later, but it's when the part of your brain, in the frontal temporal part of your brain, is deteriorating rapidly, and your behavior begins to change. And this gets to be kind of difficult because some people, depends on their natural personality, can become kind of nasty. They become very suspicious, and that's because of this deterioration of what's called your executive function of your brain. Okay, next slide, please. Now, I think we talked about this already. I found these lifestyle changes, and I'm going to go over the lifestyle changes here. I want to emphasize something for you. And that is that I attended a conference online last year. The biggest conference in the world on Alzheimer's disease is held by the Alzheimer's Association in Barcelona, Spain. And I never would have been able to go there except for COVID. Okay, COVID forced them to put it online, and I'm on the board of directors of the Washington State, Northern Idaho chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And so I got free admission to anything I wanted to see in that. It was a fascinating conference. I learned a lot of stuff. One of the things that they highlighted was some brand new research that says these lifestyle changes, as far as influencing your vulnerability to Alzheimer's disease, are most important in your teen years and your 20s. Okay, so if you have, like I did, a really poor set of lifestyles in your teen years and your 20s, you're increasing your vulnerability to Alzheimer's disease later in life. Now, if you tell a teenager, When you're 70, you're setting yourself up for trouble. Don't expect to make a big dent. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so what has been done recently? What has been done recently is to identify domains of lifestyle that will influence the progress of the disease. And it's important that all of these come together. So I found initially that physical exercise, aerobic exercise, made a huge difference. I found that initially. But then also these other things work together too. So this one is the most powerful, made the most difference. And there's some criteria. 50 minutes a day was what I ended up with. It seems to be the most optimal based on research. And working hard enough to sweat after about 10 minutes at room temperature. So if you're on the treadmill and after about 10 minutes, you should be able to sweat, or you should have trouble speaking in complete sentences with another person. And your heart rate, you'd want to be 65% of maximum for your age. And you can go on the internet, there's a little formula for finding your maximum heart rate, multiply that by 0.65, and you try to, if you got a heart monitor, you can try to get to that as a target for where you want to get. Next slide, please. And but there are some studies that have found just working in your garden can actually increase your brain volume, given some time. Next slide, please. Why is it important? I talked earlier about the brain-derived neurotrophic factor and how that's key to your brain health. Next slide, please. Here's an interesting early study that measured about 6,000 women who walked around the block so many times. And it correlated their cognitive deterioration over about 6 years, and correlated that with how much they walked. And you can see there's a definite correlation between the exercise they were getting and what happened with their cognition. Next slide, please. Now this is an interesting study that gave me my 50 minutes a day. And what they did was they had people that they knew were going to develop Alzheimer's disease because they had some rare genetic factors that would definitely lead to Alzheimer's disease. It was called the early young onset, they call it young onset Alzheimer's disease. Usually hits in your 40s and 50s, and it's very easy to predict by genetics. Hopefully we'll have time to talk a little bit more about genetics, because there are genetic factors that can increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease, but that don't cause it, that don't guarantee that you're going to get it. And 23andMe can help you find those. But what they found was they took these people that they knew were going to develop Alzheimer's disease and started having them exercise different amounts each day, or they measured it by week. And what you see here in the blue or the purple across the top, those are normal people. Those are your control group. Okay, the people with the Alzheimer's disease, they measured their cognition, and this is based on how many hours a week. So the peak there, the best improvement in cognition happened after about 5.5 to 6 hours of exercise a week. Okay, now the good news here, you get over to 8 hours, and all of a sudden, if you're working too hard, and it's actually going to hurt your cognition. It's going to make it worse. So don't do too much, but still, we're still talking 50 minutes a day, 6 days a week to get there. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, next domain is diet, and I think you should all be familiar with the Mediterranean diet. That's the one that's most promoted for brain health. There are two variants of the Mediterranean diet that are helpful. One is the DASH diet. Another one, but the third one is called the MIND diet. And the MIND diet is similar to the Mediterranean diet, but it keeps your carbs low, emphasizes fish and poultry over red meat. So there's no red meat, no pork, no beef. Blueberries and strawberries to fight oxidation, because part of the Alzheimer's process is oxidation in the brain. And And so the emphasize things that fight oxidation, tree nuts, yes to whole grain bread, keep your carbs low, So 2 slices of whole grain bread a day, no more than that. No stick, what makes this also unique, no stick butter, no margarine, they're light on cheese, and moderate red wine. Okay. The DASH diet is also good, but not as apparently as good as the MIND diet. And the MIND diet now is subject to a major study, which they've just finished doing the data collection. They're supposedly by June they're going to tell us the results. And the preliminary indication from other studies is this will actually improve cognition if followed carefully. Next slide, please. So here are the kinds of things that are in your MIND diet or even in your Mediterranean diets. Next slide. The 2 things that you're looking for in diet, reduced inflammation and reduce oxidation. Okay? Olive oil is helpful with both. Fish oil supplements don't help by all the research, but eating fish does. And nobody's not quite sure why the fish does help you if you have it once or twice a week. Because you're getting these omega-3 fatty acids that are supposed to help with inflammation. Who knows? Next slide, please. The next one is really, really important, and is one that everybody that gets to be my age is going to struggle with, and that's sleep. Because the part of your brain, I'm just reading a good book on this right now, the part of your brain that controls your sleep is right up here, and that's an early casualty of any kind of atrophy of the brain, including just normal aging. And so as that is attacked, your ability to sleep well during the night deteriorates. Sleep is really important. And the reason it's so important, there's something they call sleep architecture. Every 90 minutes, all night long, you're going through a cycle. And the cycle includes REM sleep. You may have heard of that. That's when you dream. Rapid eye movement, it's called. Okay. The other phase is called deep sleep. Now, in deep sleep, your body temperature goes down, and your mental function goes to a different kind of form. And the brain waves that are always going on decrease their frequency down to 4 times a second, more or less. Okay, and now what that apparently does is pulses your blood, which changes the circulation of brain circulation of cerebrospinal fluid in your brain. And what's also going on in there is the cells, and this has only been discovered since 2017. The cells in your brain actually shrink. And as they shrink, that increases the volume of cerebrospinal fluid around the cells, which promotes circulation of the brain. So what happens then, you're causing circulation of the cerebrospinal fluid, which gathers up all the trash, the waste products that are a consequence of Alzheimer's disease and a lot of other stuff, and carries that out to the edge of the brain where there's an interface with the lymph system, and then the lymphatic system draws that away. And they call this the lymphatic system, even though it's not a system itself. It's just a process. But sleep is really important. If you got, like me, you got sleep apnea, which a lot of people do have, it's really important to use your CPAP machine. Next slide, please. Okay, other ones, social connection. They told me don't quit your job. So I didn't quit. I ended having to quit my job. But the point of there is maintain social connectivity. So I volunteer at the food bank. I'm at the food bank every week, and I join a camera club, and I do all kinds of things. You've got to maintain your social connectivity. Part of my experience was to want to withdraw and to have to fight the urge to withdraw. Stress reduction, the stress hormones attack your hippocampus, so you want to keep your stress down. And another thing is learning new things. Now this one here, I was learning Spanish. I started learning Spanish when I was 59 years old and made a lot of progress on it. Working at Spanish did not influence, as near as I can tell, did not influence the advance of my disease, although that's often promoted. My sense is that it's really important, really effective in your teen years and your early 20s if you're learning stuff back then, especially if it has to do with language. that does influence your vulnerability to Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, please. Fasting, intermittent fasting has become something, and people are, I'm sure you've heard of it. It's gotten to be kind of fad diet sort of thing. There was, though, an article in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2019 that I read about fasting actually being effective against Alzheimer's disease. Next slide, please. So am I cured? No, I'm not. Next slide. But I have, what they told me in Seattle was that I've probably extended my life by 10 years because it's a fatal disease. It will kill you. It will probably kill me eventually. But they told me then that I was on track to be dead by 75. I'm about to turn 72 right now. But they told me, what you're doing is going to take you out to 85. So I'm good with that. I'm good with that. Okay, 75, 85 instead of 75. Okay.